The vastness of space, where the darkness seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction, was broken by the brilliant shimmer of the galactic fleets. Starships, hovering like jewels scattered across the fabric of the cosmos. The fleet had recently won a decisive victory, a hard-fought campaign against the Varkshar, a warlike alien race that had threatened the galaxy's peace for years. The battle had been long and grueling, leaving scars across the battlefield of space. But now, after countless lives lost and sacrifices made, the fleet stood. Commander Aaron Vasquez stood at the observation window of the flagship, the Valiant, gazing out at the stars. She let the peace of the moment wash over her. The constant hum of the ship's engines, the low buzz of the crew behind her, and the distant chatter of the communications officers were distant sounds too. Heard important compared to the quiet after the storm. For the first time in weeks, the command deck felt different. The tension, the nervous energy that had gripped every crew member, had finally given way to something else: relief. They had won. The galaxy was safe. And for the first time in a long time, Commander Vasquez allowed herself a "Commander, reports from the outer fleet," a voice said behind her. Vasquez turned to find Lieutenant Kellen Shore approaching, his youthful face lit by the soft glow of the terminal screens behind him. Shore was a good officer, in his early 30s, with a brilliant mind and an unshakable belief in the unity of the galaxy. He had earned his position in the fleet quickly. He was the kind of officer who believed that, when faced with the impossible, one could always find a way. The kind who thought that peace was within reach if they just tried hard enough. She nodded toward him. "How are the outer fleets holding up?" "They're fine," Shore said, with the kind of confidence that only came from a "No new threats reported in the last few hours. The Varkshar forces have fully retreated. We're stable, almost too stable." He smiled wryly. "A bit boring, actually. We've been fighting for so long. It feels strange to be doing nothing." Vasquez's lips twitched. It was true. The last few months had been nothing but battle, strategy, and moving from one victory to the next. The crew had barely had time to rest before they had been thrust into the next. She wasn't sure what to make of this new, peaceful silence. "Well," she said, turning her gaze back to the stars, "strange is better than chaos. Let's enjoy it while we can." The intercom crackled, and a voice echoed through the room: "Commander Vasquez. The fleet's awaiting your presence in the briefing room. The celebration's about to begin." A brief, shared glance between the two officers said what neither could express. There was a palpable feeling in the air: relief, yes, but also something else. Attention. A weight that they couldn't quite place. Vasquez turned on her heel. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady, though the pit in her stomach had grown larger with every passing second. She couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. It was just a fleeting thought, a nagging feeling, but it lingered nonetheless. The celebration was set in the vast halls of the Valiant, a massive cruiser that served as both command center and the heart of the Galactic Fleet. The crew had gathered, filling the space with laughter, music, and the smell of food they hadn't tasted in months. Even the officers, rigid in their duty, disciplined in their focus, seemed to have loosened up, relaxing in ways they hadn't done since before the war began. Vasquez entered the room, her commanding presence cutting through the noise. She was greeted by clapping and cheers, her crew showing their respect for the woman who had led them to victory. Her expression softened. She hadn't earned the cheers, not yet, not when so many had fallen. But they were hers. Nonetheless, she made her way to the podium at the center of the room. With one last glance at the crew, she cleared her throat. The chatter quieted, and all eyes turned to her. "For the last 5 years, we have been at war. We have lost so much friends, comrades, family," she began, her voice strong, but today, we celebrate not just a victory, but a future. A future where peace will return to our galaxy, a future where we can rebuild. And for that, I thank each and every one of you. The room filled with applause again, but this time, there was a new energy too. A belief, a hope, that maybe, just maybe, things could finally be different. As the celebration continued, Vasquez moved through the crowd, exchanging brief words with her officers and crew. She spotted Lieutenant Shore standing near the far corner of the hall, his eyes scanning the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "You look like you're about to lead another campaign," Vasquez said as she Shore smiled, a little sheepishly. "I'm just thinking. Something feels off." Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that the way of war? Always looking over your shoulder for the next battle?" Shore shook his head, his brow furrowing. "No, it's not that. I just have this sense. A feeling like the galaxy's quieted for a reason. Like we're forgetting something. Something important." Vasquez sighed, casting one more look at the smiling faces of her crew. "You're not the only one. But for now, let's enjoy the peace while it lasts." But as she turned away, she couldn't help but feel the unease grow inside her. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had miscalculated. In their celebration, in their victory, maybe they had overlooked something far more dangerous than the Varkshar. Unseen by the crew, an encrypted signal blinked across the farthest reaches of the galaxy, from the dark edge of known space. The faintest trace of an ancient, forgotten force, the signal had just begun to reach the galactic core. And Earth, their homeworld, was at the center of it. The vastness of space was unyielding, cold, empty, and indifferent. Yet within the silence of the universe, there were still secrets to be. No matter how advanced the Galactic Fleet had become, how much they had achieved, in their years of exploration, they could never shake the underlying feeling that there were things out there unseen, unknown, and sometimes far more dangerous than they could comprehend. Commander Erin Vasquez had lived her life in space, leading her fleet through countless wars, crises, and conquests. She was accustomed to the unknown, to navigating the strange, unpredictable reaches of the galaxy. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next. The communications officer's voice broke through the quiet hum of the command. "Commander Vasquez," the officer said, sounding unusually tense. "We're receiving another signal. It's different from the previous one." Vasquez's eyes narrowed. The first signal had been a curiosity, a brief anomaly that had sparked interest, but seemed too weak to pose a serious threat. At first, it had been dismissed as just another random transmission. But now, the second signal was growing stronger, its presence undeniable. She turned to Lieutenant Kellen Shore, who had been silently observing the cruise. "Patch it through," Vasquez ordered, her voice steady but carrying the weight of. The officer nodded, typing quickly at the terminal. Moments later, the strange signal filled the room, an irregular, static-laced transmission, punctuated by patterns of data that no one in the Galactic Fleet could immediately decode. "Still no readable language," Shore muttered, his brow furrowing. "But it's definitely coming from the direction of Earth." Vasquez felt a shiver crawl down her spine. Earth, the once primitive, isolated world at the edge of the galaxy. The idea that anything could come from Earth had always seemed impossible. The Terran Coalition had been nothing more than a backwater civilization when the fleet first began exploring the stars centuries ago. They were a peaceful, resource-strapped race, barely advanced beyond their own planet's atmosphere. They had little interest in galactic politics, preferring to stay out of the greater galactic conflicts. So why now? Why would Earth's signal suddenly emerge after so many centuries of silence? "Can you triangulate its origin?" Vasquez asked, her voice tight with both curiosity and apprehension. Shore worked quickly, his fingers dancing over the control panel. The sound of clicking keys filled the room as he processed the data. The team behind him, too, was immersed in their work, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible code. "I'm pulling up coordinates now," Shore replied after a long pause. "It's coming from deep within the uncharted sector of the galaxy, close to the outer rim." Vasquez turned to her team. Have we had any prior scans in that region? A communications officer spoke up, her voice tinged with uncertainty. We have some preliminary scans of the area from years ago, but nothing recent. The region's been off limits due to the hostile environment. The hostile environment was an understatement. The Outer Rim was a lawless, uncharted expanse of space one where very few ships ventured due to its dangerous anomalies and the presence of outlaw factions. But Vasquez was far more concerned with the fact that Earth, of all places, was broadcasting in that direction. Send a probe, Vasquez ordered, her voice commanding. I want to know exactly what's out there. Now, Shore gave a quick nod, acknowledging the order. Understood, Commander. The second stretched into what felt like hours as the probe was launched, its sleek body darting toward the uncharted sector. Vasquez watched, her gaze fixed on the holographic display in front of her. The probe's trajectory was straight, unwavering. It would take several hours to reach its destination, but the data would give them anything that could explain this inexplicable signal. As the minutes passed, Vasquez found her mind drifting back to the celebration that had occurred only hours ago. She had thought that, for once, the galaxy might finally have a chance to rest, that the peace they had earned would last for more than just a fleeting moment. But now, she felt the weight of her earlier unease creeping back into her. Shore stood next to her, his expression unreadable as he studied the flickering readings on the display. Commander, he said after a long pause, are we certain this is coming from Earth? I mean, Earth was a backwater planet. They barely even had space travel when we first made contact with them. I know, Vasquez replied, her voice tinged with frustration. I know, but this signal is unmistakably tied to their sector. The frequency is too specific to calibrate it. It's a Terran signature, and yet it's unlike anything we've encountered before. It's too precise, too deliberate. Shore's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. What if Earth's been hiding something all this time? What if they've developed technologies far beyond anything we imagined? Vasquez didn't respond immediately, instead focusing on the signal, now pulsing on the screen. Could it be true? Could Earth, the planet that had once seemed like nothing more than a speck in the vastness of space, really be hiding something that could change the balance of power in the galaxy? We'll know soon enough, she said, her voice quiet but firm. The hours stretched on, and still, the probe made its way through the deep. Vasquez couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach. The fleet had been victorious, but now, with this unexpected signal from Earth, there was a sense that they had all been blind to something larger, something more significant than they could have ever anticipated. As the probe neared its destination, Shore's voice broke through her thoughts. Commander, we've got something, he said, his eyes wide with shock. We've located a fleet. A fleet. The words hung in the air like an unspoken accusation. The probe sensors were confirming it. A massive fleet far larger than anything Earth should have been capable of was just beyond the horizon. Vasquez's heart raced as she absorbed the implications. The question now wasn't whether Earth had something to hide, it was whether they were ready to face what Earth had become. The cold emptiness of space had never felt as oppressive as it did now, as the Valiant and the rest of the Galactic Fleet stood at the edge of the uncharted. It was a region few had dared to venture into, largely untouched by any. A place where even the stars seemed distant, cold, and indifferent to the struggles of those who lived and fought within the galaxy. But now, this silent corner of the cosmos had become the focal point of a new and terrifying discovery. Commander Aaron Vasquez stood at the helm, her eyes locked on the massive holographic display that filled the command deck. The probe had returned, its data revealing something that no one had expected. A fleet beyond anything the Galactic Fleet had ever encountered, and it was unmistakably Terran in origin. I can't believe it, Lieutenant Kellen Shore muttered, his voice low, and he stood beside her, eyes wide as the hologram shifted to show the fleet's unmistakable silhouette. These ships, they're massive. and their technology is beyond anything we've seen. Vasquez's fingers grip the edge of the console, her knuckles whitening. We've never seen ships like this before. Not even close. The fleet was unlike anything in the Galactic Fleet's catalog of known. The ships in the Terran fleet, these dreadnoughts, were massive, colossal structures that seemed to stretch the very limits of space. Their dark, angular designs were sleek and brutal, forged from materials that the Galactic Fleet scientists couldn't even identify. The hulls were polished black, reflecting the void of space, and each ship bristled with weaponry that defied imagination: cannon turrets the size of small moons, pulse lasers that glowed with an unsettling blue hue, and energy shields that shimmered like the aurora borealis on the surface of a. The sheer scale of the ships was almost overwhelming. The dreadnoughts dwarfed the Valiant and its fleet, even the most advanced battleships, in sheer size and firepower. Their weapons appeared to be focused on one thing: total annihilation. These weren't just warships. These were weapons of mass destruction designed to lay waste to entire star systems. And they were heading straight for the Galactic Fleet. How did they get this far? Shore asked, his voice filled with disbelief. I mean, Earth couldn't have built this. Not without us knowing. Not after everything we've seen over the last few centuries. Vasquez shook her head. I don't know, but we're going to find out. She glanced at the map, watching as the fleet's formation drew ever closer to the edge of the Galactic Fleet's known space. The ships were moving at a pace that would bring them within striking distance of the fleet's position in less than 48 hours. The timeline was tight to tight. Activate all communication channels, Vasquez ordered, her voice sharp with. Send a message to the fleet, tell them to prepare for immediate action. We don't know what we're up against, but we'll be ready. Understood, Commander, the communications officer responded. As the crew scrambled to execute their orders, Vasquez took a slow breath, fighting to steady her nerves. The fleet had been at peace, celebrating a victory just hours ago, and now they were on the brink of what could be a cataclysmic war with a power they couldn't. The Terran fleet, these dreadnoughts, were coming, and with them, a question that, why had Earth, of all places, come to command such an overwhelming force? The thought gnawed at her. The Earth she knew was a fragile, isolated planet at the very edge of the galaxy, struggling to remain relevant among the other, more powerful races. But this was something else entirely. Hours later, Vasquez stood on the observation deck once again, this time with a full view of the fleet's impending arrival. The dreadnoughts had slowed their advance, seemingly content to keep their distance, as though toying with the Galactic Fleet, testing its resolve. There were 5 of them, each a massive behemoth of war, each more imposing man. Commander, we've been able to decode some of the transmissions from the fleet, Shore said as he stepped up beside her. His expression was grim. It's not just a standard military broadcast. There's something different about it. What do you mean? Vasquez asked, her voice tight with concern. It's a command structure, but it's not in any format we're used to, Shore explained, glancing at the data on his terminal. It's military, yes, but there is something almost civilian about it, like a collective of some sort. The command language is unlike anything we've encountered. It's a mix of old Terran military codes with something new, something evolving. Vasquez's brow furrowed. So, they're not just a military force. This is more than a simple war fleet. Shore nodded. That's what it looks like. Whatever's happening with Earth, it's far beyond what we thought. This is an entirely new kind of power. Suddenly, the room darkened as the holographic projection shifted. The entire command deck fell silent. The fleet was no longer just a speck in the distance. The dreadnoughts were in range close enough now that the full weight of their presence could be felt in the air. Their mass was overwhelming, and their technology radiated a menacing hum, a low vibration that seemed to penetrate the bones of every crew member aboard the. And then, without warning, a transmission came through clear, direct, and it was Earth's voice. To the Galactic Fleet, we are Earth's Ascendant Fleet. The voice, calm yet authoritative, rang through the ship speakers. We come not to negotiate, but to reclaim what is ours. Prepare yourselves, for we will not wait for your permission to take our place. The voice faded as quickly as it had come, leaving nothing but a deep, unsettling silence in its wake. Vasquez's mind raced. Reclaim what is ours. Earth, the planet that had barely managed to keep its world together for centuries. What were they talking about? The full enormity of the threat had just been made clear. Earth's Ascendant Fleet was not here to engage in peaceful diplomacy. They were here to conquer. And if they could build such a force in secret without the fleet noticing, who knew what else they were capable of? Commander, Shore said quietly, his voice low but filled with a kind of that echoed through the room. They're not coming to talk. They're coming to take. And we might not be able to stop them. Vasquez clenched her fists, her gaze fixed on the 5 enormous dreadnoughts that now loomed on the horizon. There was no turning back now. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin, and Earth, of all places, was. The countdown has begun. On the bridge of the Valiant, Commander Aaron Vasquez stood motionless, staring at the vast expanse of space. The 5 dreadnoughts that made up Earth's Ascendant Fleet hovered ominously at the edge of the Galactic Fleet's defensive perimeter, their massive forms silhouetted against the backdrop of stars. They were immobile, like ancient titans preparing for war. Each ship was more than a kilometer long, each weapon capable of wiping out entire fleets in a single salvo. The mere thought of them was enough to make the seasoned warriors aboard the Valiant shift nervously. This isn't just a threat, Vasquez muttered to herself. This is an extinction event waiting to happen. Her thoughts were interrupted by the shrill chime of the communications console. The officer manning the terminal spoke quickly, his voice urgent. Commander, we've just received a transmission. It's encrypted, but I've managed to crack the code. It's from Earth. Vasquez's heart skipped a beat. She nodded, a grim expression settling on her face. Put it through. The screen flickered, and then a familiar face appeared on the display. Aaron didn't recognize the man, but the insignia on his uniform, a dark, almost regal design, was unmistakable. The words Earth Ascendant Fleet were etched across his chest in bold silver. Commander Vasquez, the man said, his voice deep and unyielding. I am Admiral Solis of Earth's Ascendant Fleet. We have come to take what is rightfully ours. Vasquez took a breath, fighting to keep her composure. You don't know what you're doing, she said, her voice steady despite the surge of anger welling inside her. Earth was once a peaceful planet. You've turned against everything your people once stood for. Admiral Solis gave a tight, almost pitying smile. Your ignorance is expected, Commander. But understand this, Earth has ascended beyond the limitations of the galactic. We are the future of the galaxy. You had your chance to lead. Now it's time for us to claim what's ours. His face disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the eerie silence of space in its wake. Solis's words echoed in Vasquez's mind. We are the future. The arrogance in that statement made her blood boil, but it also fueled her. Whatever Earth had become, she wouldn't allow them to reshape the galaxy into something that suited only their newfound ambitions. Shut down all external communications, Vasquez ordered, her voice biting. We cannot waste time with diplomacy any longer. Prepare the fleet for engagement. We'll give them the first strike if we have to. Hours passed in tense silence, the fleet preparing for what was almost certainly going to be the battle of their lives. The crew aboard the Valiant had been through battles before, but nothing like this, nothing where the enemy had such overwhelming strength, such unknowable. The first wave of preparations was completed. The fleet ships were positioned in defensive formations, their weapons primed. The fleet's best strategists were working around the clock, trying to find weaknesses in the incoming enemy's formations. But with each passing moment, Vasquez felt the weight of their unknown capabilities growing heavier. Commander, we've received a status update from our forward reconnaissance team. Lieutenant Shore said as he stepped onto the bridge, his expression grim. The Dreadnoughts have begun moving. How far are they from engagement range? Vasquez asked, her voice sharp. Approximately 200,000 kilometers and closing fast, Shore replied, checking his. They're deploying fighter wings. Looks like they're preparing for a full-scale attack. They won't wait much longer. Vasquez turned her gaze back to the holographic display, where the positions of both fleets were now marked in red and blue. The gap between the two forces was closing rapidly. Her hand moved instinctively to the control panel, tightening into a fist as she saw the Dreadnoughts grow larger on the screen. All ships, prepare for evasive maneuvers, Vasquez word. Lock weapons and engage the enemy on my command. Her heart pounded as the seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. The massive Dreadnoughts were closing the distance with terrifying speed, their fighter wings flitting around them like the swarm of locusts before the storm. All stations report readiness, Commander, the communications officer called. We're ready to engage. Let's make them regret coming here, Vasquez muttered, her hands firmly gripping the console. She took a final breath. Engage. The fleet moved as one. The first salvo came from the Valiant, a series of high-power plasma cannons, unleashed with deadly precision. But it had no effect. The energy shields on the Dreadnoughts flickered momentarily, but they absorbed the blast with ease. The shields shimmered in the vacuum of space, almost mocking the fleet's attempt. The Dreadnoughts fired back almost immediately, their weapons releasing long, searing streaks of blue energy. The shockwaves from the impact shook the Valiant to its core as the first wave of plasma struck its shields. The energy shields held for a moment, but the strain was evident. The fleet's defenses were being tested hard. Shields at 80%, reported the tactical officer, his voice strained. We can't take another hit like that. Vasquez's mind raced. She had to adapt and fast. They couldn't rely on brute force alone. If the Valiant was going to survive, they needed a strategy. They needed to outsmart these Dreadnoughts to find a way to breach their near impenetrable defenses. Deploy interceptors, she ordered. Have them target the Dreadnoughts' fighter wings. We need to take out their support ships first. The hangar doors of the Valiant opened, and the fleet's interceptor fighters blasted into space, their sleek forms darting to engage the Terran fighters. The sky was a ballet of flashing lasers and the streaks of missiles, the scent of ionized air almost palpable. The first few Terran fighters were down with ease, but the Dreadnoughts had far more firepower than the Galactic Fleet had anticipated. Within moments, they had released their full payload of fighter drones, a swarm of sleek ships that darted across the battlefield with lethal efficiency. We're being overwhelmed, a voice shouted over the comms. We need reinforcements. Vasquez's pulse quickened as her eyes snapped to the hologram once more. The enemy fleet was beginning to push forward, and the Galactic Fleet's front lines were starting to crack. The Dreadnoughts, unrelenting in their assault, were tearing through the fighter. Divert all remaining energy to shields, Vasquez ordered. We need to hold the line until the interceptors can get through. The Valiant shuddered as another wave of fire hit its shields, but they held. For now, Commander, Shore called from the tactical station. One of the Dreadnoughts is targeting our engines. They're locking on with a high-intensity beam weapon. Evade, Vasquez shouted. Get us out of here. The Valiant lurched violently as it attempted a hard turn, but the Dreadnoughts' beam weapon connected, causing a massive explosion that rocked the ship. The lights flickered as the hull groaned under the strain. Damage report, Vasquez barked. Engines at 60%, the tactical officer reported. Hull integrity is holding, but we've lost several systems. We can't maintain evasive maneuvers for long. Vasquez clenched her jaw. She couldn't afford to let the Valiant fall. Not yet. Not when the entire galaxy was at risk. All ships, initiate counterstrike. Target their engines and weapons, take down their shields if you can. We have to break their formation, or we'll lose the entire fleet. Her voice, hard and commanding, reverberated through the bridge. In the chaotic space beyond, the battle continued to rage. It was no longer a contest of strength, it was a fight for survival. Earth's Ascendant Fleet had proven one thing: they were no longer the helpless, vulnerable race they had once been. They were something new, something dangerous, and they were here to claim their place in the stars. The fate of the galaxy would be decided here, at this moment. The battle was relentless. The once proud Galactic Fleet, stretched thin and overwhelmed by the power of Earth's Ascendant Fleet, now fought tooth and nail for its very survival. The Valiant shook under the constant barrage of enemy fire. Vasquez gripped the armrest of her command chair, her knuckles white from the... She could feel the vibrations of each impact through the ship, the deafening hum of the engine struggling to keep the Valiant moving under the crushing weight. "Shields are holding at 30%, Commander," Lieutenant Shore shouted over the... He glanced frantically at his console, sweat dripping down his face. "But the port side is taking heavy fire. If they hit us there again, we won't last another round. Redirect all power to port shields," Vasquez barked. "Get us a clear line of fire. We need to target their main Dreadnought Titanus. It's the one leading the charge." "Yes, Commander," Shore nodded, his hands flying over the controls. The bridge crew worked in sync, pushing every ounce of energy the Valiant could muster into its failing shields while the targeting systems locked onto the Dreadnought Titanus. The ship was enormous, impossibly large, and its weapons were beyond anything the Galactic Fleet had ever seen. A pulse of blue light shot from the Titanus's bow, slamming into the Valiant's shields with enough force to rattle the bones of everyone aboard. The Valiant lurched to the side as it took the hit, and the lights flickered. "Damage report," Vasquez demanded, her voice tight with tension. "We've lost several auxiliary systems, Commander," the tactical officer called out, his voice strained. "Life support is stable, but we've lost the primary weapons array. We're down to secondary turrets." Vasquez's gaze hardened. The odds were quickly turning against them. With the Titanus relentlessly pounding away at the Valiant and no way to counter with their full arsenal, it was only a matter of time before they were. "Get those secondary turrets online," Vasquez ordered. "We need to buy time for the rest of the fleet to regroup. Divert power from engines if we have to." As Shore worked quickly to reroute power, Vasquez's mind raced. She had been through battles before, but this was different. This was an enemy so far beyond the Galactic Fleet's technology that it felt like fighting a shadow of their former selves. Titanus wasn't just a warship, it was a symbol of everything the Ascendant Fleet. Earth was no longer the vulnerable, fractured planet that the fleet had once. Earth had grown into a force that rivaled their own, and that meant everything they had fought for was at risk. Suddenly, a blaring alarm cut through the tense atmosphere of the bridge, and a shrill voice echoed over the comms. "Commander, we've lost the Aegis. They've been completely disabled, core breach imminent. They're a sitting target for Titanus." Vasquez's stomach dropped. The Aegis had been one of the fleet's strongest destroyers, a critical asset. Their defensive strategy. If it was gone, that would leave a hole in the defensive line. "Send immediate evacuation orders," Vasquez said, her voice now low, but "get all survivors off that ship. We can't afford to lose any more ships." Shore nodded solemnly, tapping away at his console. The crew watched in grim silence, knowing that each life lost on the Aegis was a strike against the fleet. The battle outside raged on. Waves of Terran fighter drones darted across the battlefield relentlessly, picking off galactic interceptors as they went. The Galactic Fleet's own counterattacks were sparse to few ships, too much firepower to handle. One by one, smaller ships were falling. The once thriving fleet, filled with hope and victory, was now reduced to a scattered line of desperate resistance. And it wasn't just the ships that were suffering. Vasquez could feel the morale of her crew beginning to crack. The faces around her were drawn, pale, their eyes hollow from hours of nonstop. "Commander," Shore said hesitantly, "we need to pull back. If we stay any longer, we're going to lose everything. We have to regroup and rethink." No, Vasquez interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension. We're not retreating. We hold our ground. Shore hesitated, but only for a second. Yes, Commander. Vasquez turned back to the view of the battlefield. Through the haze of weapon fire, she saw the monstrous silhouette of Titanus, growing larger on the holo display. It was as though the ship was drawing all light into itself, becoming an impenetrable shadow. And within that shadow, Vasquez knew, lay the heart of Earth's power. Then, suddenly, there was a change in the tide. A ripple of shock coursed through the Valiant as a new signal flared to life on. Vasquez's heart skipped a beat. Commander, we've got reinforcements, the communications officer shouted, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief. Unknown ships incoming fast. Vasquez blinked in disbelief as a new fleet appeared on the radar, cutting through the chaos like a beacon of light in the darkness. The ships were sleek, angular, and fast, cutting through the fighter swarms with incredible precision. They moved in perfect formation, attacking the Ascendant Fleet's flank with calculated ferocity. Who the hell are they? Vasquez muttered under her breath, watching as the unknown fleet tore through the enemy's lines. Unknown, Commander. They're not showing any standard registration codes, the communications officer said, his brow furrowed. But they're not Terran. These ships are nothing like anything we've seen. The new fleet unleashed hell. Plasma cannons and high-velocity missile pods tore through the Terran ships like Titanus, once the dominating presence on the battlefield, was forced to shift its attention, diverting resources to defend itself from this new threat. The tables were turning. Are you seeing this? Shore said, his voice trembling with a mix of astonishment. It's like they knew exactly where to strike. Vasquez's mind raced. Could it be? Could there be forces in the galaxy who knew about Earth's Ascendant Fleet? Had they been waiting for this moment, prepared for this fight? And if so, what did that mean for the future of the galaxy? Target Titanus, fire everything we've got, Vasquez ordered. For the first time, and what felt like hours, the crew of the Valiant moved with purpose, their spirits reignited by the arrival of the reinforcements. Every weapon on the ship blazed to life as they focused all firepower on the energy shields around the Dreadnought flickered under the barrage. The Dreadnought's hull trembled, and Vasquez could see a faint crack beginning. Titanus was weakening. But just as hope began to rise, another chilling message flashed across the Commander, there's a new threat. More Terran ships. They're incoming from the other side of the sector. Vasquez's stomach twisted. She had barely a moment to breathe before the battle was reignited once more. Another wave of Terran ships, even larger than the first, appeared on the reinforcements they had been given had bought them precious minutes, but the true strength of Earth's Ascendant Fleet was still on the horizon. The war for the galaxy had only just begun. The Valiant groaned under the strain of continuous fire. Its hull was pockmarked with scorch marks, and the once pristine bridge now buzzed with warning lights. Commander Vasquez stood at the helm, her face a mask of determination, and the enemy's relentless assault, coupled with a new wave of Terran reinforcements, left no room for respite. Shields at 12%, Shore called out, his voice rising with panic. We can't take much more of this. Vasquez clenched her jaw, her mind warring. The odds were growing slimmer by the second, and yet retreat was not an option. Titanus was too close, too powerful. The entire fleet was on the brink of collapse. All stations, prepare for evasive maneuvers, she ordered sharply, her voice. We're going in for one final strike. The Valiant shook violently as another barrage hit. Vasquez's heart pounded, and she knew this was it. A final push. If they failed now, the galaxy would fall under the boot of Earth's Ascendant. With a decisive motion, she gave the command, fire everything we have. The ship lurched forward, weapons blazing, as the fleet's last desperate strike. For the first time in the battle, hope flickered. But as the Valiant shot into the heart of the storm, Vasquez knew the outcome was still uncertain. There was no turning back now.